Principal Expels' black farmer's son Billionaire arrives by helicopter the next day. The sun was high in the sky, casting long shadows across the schoolyard as the students filed into the building. It was just another regular school day, or so it seemed. But for Marcus, the son of a hardworking black farmer, today would be a day that changed the course of his life forever. Marcus had always been an exceptional student. Quiet, determined, and focused, he spent his days balancing schoolwork with helping his father, Isaiah, on their small farm. His life wasn't easy, but Marcus never complained. He understood the value of hard work, learned from his father's example, and carried those lessons with him everywhere he went. But today, as he sat at his desk in the back of the classroom, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The usual hum of conversation and the sound of shuffling papers filled the air, but his mind kept drifting back to what had happened earlier in the week. He had done nothing wrong, yet he could feel the tension building. And he had no idea how this would all unfold. Mr. Caldwell, the principal, had always been a figure of authority. Strict, unyielding, and often stern, he was the kind of man who expected nothing less than perfection. Over the years, he had clashed with Marcus more than once, whether it was because of his humble background or because of his quiet demeanor. Mr. Caldwell always seemed to see something in Marcus that didn't sit right with him. But Marcus had kept his head down, focusing on his studies and trying his best to avoid conflict. Today, however, was different. Mr. Caldwell stood at the front of the class, his usual posture straight and rigid. His eyes scanned the room, lingering just a little too long on Marcus. For reasons Marcus couldn't understand, it felt like Mr. Caldwell had been waiting for a reason to pick on him, and it wasn't long before he found one. "Marcus," Mr. Caldwell's voice rang out, cutting through the hum of the classroom. "Can you tell us the answer to this question?" Marcus felt a sudden rush of heat flood his chest. He had been daydreaming, his mind drifting to the fields where he had been working just the day before. But he knew he couldn't let that distract him. The question was easy, one he had studied the night before, but for some reason his mind went blank. He had always been quick with his studies, but now in front of everyone, it was as though his mind had turned to stone. I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell, I don't know the answer right now," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. A moment of silence passed, heavy and thick. Marcus could feel every eye in the room on him, but his gaze never left the desk in front of him. He could sense the judgment. He could sense the disappointment in the air, like an invisible weight pressing down on him. Mr. Caldwell's lips curled into a thin, disapproving smile. "How disappointing," he muttered, loud enough for the entire class to hear. "For someone who thinks they're so smart, you sure know how to fail under pressure." The word stung, harder than Marcus expected. It wasn't just that Mr. Caldwell had called him out in front of the class. It was the way he said it, as if Marcus was nothing more than an inconvenience to him, as if he were no better than any other student who failed to meet the high expectations of a school that catered to the privileged. But Marcus had no time to think about the unfairness of it all. He needed to focus on getting through the class, on proving that this moment would not define him. "Marcus," Mr. Caldwell continued, his tone now sharp and cutting, "perhaps you should leave the classroom and reconsider whether or not this is the place for you." The words hit like a slap. Marcus couldn't believe what he was hearing. The other students in the room shifted uncomfortably, but no one dared to speak up. No one dared to challenge Mr. Caldwell, not even his friends. Marcus was alone in this. "I don't think I understand, sir," Marcus replied, his voice shaking just slightly, though he tried to keep it steady. "What do you mean, leave the classroom?" Mr. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "You heard me," he said. "Perhaps this isn't the place for someone like you. Maybe you should go home and reconsider whether or not you're capable of handling the responsibility of being here." A hushed silence fell over the room. No one said a word. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he had made a mistake, but this was too much. He had been a good student. He had worked hard, and now he was being treated like this, like he didn't belong. "Get out," Mr. Caldwell snapped, his voice cold. "Now," Marcus stood up slowly, his body numb. As he gathered his books and turned toward the door, he could feel the eyes of his classmates on him. Some looked away, some seemed uncomfortable, and a few stared in silent judgment. He wasn't sure which one hurt the most. The moment he stepped out of the classroom and into the hallway, he felt as though the world had stopped. He had been expelled for what? For a moment of weakness for something he didn't even understand, it felt surreal, like a nightmare he couldn't escape from. But this was no dream. This was reality. Marcus walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing in the empty space. He didn't know where he was going or what to do next, but he knew he couldn't go back. Not after this. He wasn't sure what would happen now, but one thing was certain. This wasn't just about a single failure, it was about something much bigger. Something that went beyond his personal mistakes. At that moment, Marcus thought of his father, Isaiah, the man who had raised him with love and discipline, the man who worked tirelessly on their farm, tending to the land, planting the crops, and providing for his family with everything he had. Marcus knew his father had always believed in him, even when the world seemed to ignore them. But now he was about to face a battle far bigger than any he could have imagined. As Marcus made his way toward the exit, he heard footsteps behind him. He turned, surprised to see his best friend Ethan standing in the doorway. Ethan was one of the few people who had always stuck by him, even when others treated him like an outsider. "Marcus, wait up," Ethan called out, jogging to catch up. "What do you want, Ethan?" Marcus said, his voice tinged with frustration. "I just got expelled. I don't think there's much to say about it." Ethan caught his breath and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Don't let him get to you, man," he said quietly. "You're better than this. You're smarter than this. Don't let him win." Marcus couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way out of this nightmare. But he couldn't do it alone. He needed help, and in that moment he knew who to turn to. It was time to call his father. The sun was beginning to set as Marcus stood outside the school gates, his mind swirling with disbelief and anger. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected to be humiliated, not like this. It wasn't just that he had been expelled. It was the way it had been done, the way Mr. Caldwell had singled him out in front of everyone as though he didn't belong. And even more than that, it was the realization that this wasn't just about one incident. This was about something deeper, something about who he was and where he came from. As he walked toward the old, rusted truck his father had left for him to use, Marcus couldn't help but think about all the years of hard work, all the sacrifices his father had made to provide for him and his siblings. Isaiah, his father, had built their farm from the ground up, using every ounce of strength he had to make sure they never went without. But now Marcus wasn't just carrying the weight of his own failure. He felt like he was carrying the weight of his father's disappointment too. He climbed into the truck and started the engine, the sound of the motor drowning out the thoughts racing in his head. The drive home was quiet, the road stretching out in front of him as the world around him turned darker. The night was closing in, and so were the harsh truths he would soon have to face. Isaiah was working late that day. Marcus knew that much. His father always worked late. Whether it was planting crops or repairing fences, Isaiah always found something to keep him busy. Marcus had tried to help him as much as he could, but the work on the farm was hard, back-breaking. It required a lot more than just physical strength. It demanded patience, resilience, and an understanding of how things worked, a lesson his father had taught him over the years. But today, it felt different. It wasn't just about the farm. It was about Marcus's future, about how the world seemed to see him. Every part of his life, every moment seemed to be dictated by forces beyond his control. He had always felt like an outsider, never fully accepted by his peers and certainly never fully understood by the people in positions of power. But now it was all crashing down on him all at once. As the truck bounced along the uneven dirt road, Marcus pulled up to the farmhouse, the lights in the house flickering through the window. He parked the truck and sat there for a moment, taking in the sight of his home. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. It had been a place of comfort, a place of hard work, but most of all, it had been a place of hope. And now Marcus wasn't sure what to expect when he walked through that door. He opened the truck door and walked toward the house. The cool night air wrapped around him as he approached the porch. He didn't know how to tell his father. How do you tell someone who has worked so hard to provide for you that you failed? That you've been sent home from school for something that wasn't even your fault? It seemed impossible. Marcus stepped inside and there was his father, standing in the kitchen, his sleeves rolled up as he cleaned some tools. He looked up when Marcus entered, his expression unreadable. "How was school today?" Isaiah asked, his voice steady. For a moment, Marcus didn't speak. He stood there, feeling the weight of the world pressing down on him. His father had always been a man of few words, but his presence was enough. He knew when Marcus needed to talk, and he knew when it was time to let silence take its place. Finally, Marcus found his voice.
Dad, I
got expelled. Isaiah's hands froze mid-motion, and for the first time, Marcus saw a flicker of concern in his father's eyes. Expelled? Isaiah repeated, his voice low. What happened? Marcus shook his head. It wasn't fair. Mr. Caldwell, he just picked on me. I didn't even do anything wrong. He humiliated me in front of the whole class, and then he told me to leave. I don't know why he did it. Isaiah put down the tool he was holding and walked toward Marcus. Tell me exactly what happened, he said, his tone calm. But the concern in his voice was impossible to ignore. Marcus took a deep breath and recounted the events of the day, explaining everything that had transpired, from the moment he had been called on in class to the moment he had been told to leave. His father listened intently, his expression unreadable. But Marcus could feel the anger building in him, even though Isaiah didn't show it. When Marcus finished, his father exhaled slowly. I'm sorry, son, he said quietly. That's not how it should have been handled. No one should treat you like that. Marcus felt his throat tighten. I don't know what to do, Dad. I don't know how to fix this. Isaiah paused, his hand resting on Marcus's shoulder. I'm not sure either, but I do know this. We don't just take things lying down. You're my son, and you've got more inside of you than what people see. You have a future, and I won't let anyone take that away from you. At that moment, Marcus's heart swelled with emotion. His father's words were a balm to the pain he was feeling. But they didn't change the fact that he had been humiliated, that he had been cast aside without reason. He knew his father wouldn't just sit back and let this happen. But what could they do? What could one man do against the weight of the system? Isaiah's voice broke through his thoughts. I'm going to make a call, he said. There's someone I know who might be able to help. Marcus looked up, confused. Who? Isaiah gave him a reassuring smile. A friend of mine. A man who owes me a favor. I saved his life a long time ago, and now it's time for him to return the favor. Marcus didn't fully understand, but he trusted his father. If there was one thing Isaiah had taught him, it was that there was always a way forward, no matter how difficult the path seemed. Isaiah left the kitchen and picked up the phone, dialing a number Marcus didn't recognize. As his father spoke in hushed tones, Marcus couldn't help but wonder who this person was, this friend who might be able to help them when all seemed lost. I'll handle it, Isaiah said into the phone. I'll get back to you. Thank you. When he hung up, he turned to Marcus, his eyes determined. This isn't over, son. We'll get you back in that school. We'll make sure they understand just who they're dealing with. And in that moment, Marcus felt a spark of hope. His father's unwavering belief in him, the strength in his voice, filled him with something he hadn't felt in days. A sense of purpose. He wasn't alone in this fight. They would face it together. Little did Marcus know, this call would set in motion a chain of events that would change the course of his life forever. The wheels of justice had begun to turn, and soon, the very people who thought they could break him would have to answer for their actions. The air felt different that morning, charged with a sense of anticipation. It was still early, the sky a pale blue, and Marcus was sitting at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a warm cup of coffee. His father Isaiah had already been up for hours tending to the farm, but Marcus hadn't been able to sleep much the night before. The thought of his expulsion, of how unfairly he had been treated, had kept him awake, tossing and turning in his bed. But today something felt different. His father's resolve, the promise of help from the mysterious friend, kept him grounded, even though a part of him still couldn't believe it was all real. Isaiah entered the kitchen, his boots dusty from working outside. He wiped his hands on his jeans and walked over to Marcus. The lines on his face were deepened by years of hard labor, but his eyes still held the same fire that had driven him all his life. I made the call, Isaiah said, looking at Marcus with a knowing expression. He's coming. Marcus looked up, his heart skipping a beat. Who is he, Dad? This person you know. Isaiah took a seat across from him, leaning back slightly. A man I saved years ago when I was younger. He was just starting out, trying to make something of himself. Lost in the world like most people are. I helped him when no one else would. He promised me if I ever needed him, he'd be there. Marcus stared at his father, trying to piece together the picture of this mysterious man who was now offering to help. But Dad, what can he really do? The principal, Mr. Caldwell, he has the power here. It's not like someone can just swoop in and change everything. Isaiah smiled, a faint glimmer of confidence in his eyes. Sometimes, son, the right people know how to change things. You'd be surprised how quickly the game changes when someone with power steps in. Marcus wasn't entirely convinced, but he knew his father wasn't the kind of man to make empty promises, so he simply nodded and tried to push the doubts out of his mind. An hour passed, then another. The morning dragged on, and Marcus found himself growing restless. He had tried to help out on the farm, but it was hard to focus. The thought of the school, of the students who had witnessed his humiliation, kept creeping into his mind. How could he ever go back there? How could he face those people again, knowing they had seen him fail? Just as he was about to retreat to his room to escape his thoughts, he heard the faint whirring of a helicopter in the distance. It was a sound he hadn't heard in years. He quickly stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. The sound grew louder, and then, from over the tree line, the helicopter appeared, its sleek black body cutting through the air, casting a shadow over the farm as it descended. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his mind racing. He couldn't believe it. This was happening. The man his father had called had arrived. Isaiah, ever the steady presence, walked over to the door and looked out at the helicopter. "Stay here," he said to Marcus, his voice calm and reassuring. "I'll go meet him. You stay inside and wait." Marcus nodded, though part of him wanted to run outside to see with his own eyes what was happening. His father, who had always handled everything with quiet dignity, was now preparing to introduce him to someone who could potentially change everything. It felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. The helicopter landed smoothly in the field next to the house, its massive blades still spinning as the sound of the rotors echoed through the air. Marcus couldn't help but stare out the window, his heart racing in anticipation. The figure who stepped out of the helicopter was tall, well-dressed, and radiated an air of quiet confidence. His presence was commanding, and even from this distance Marcus could see the way he moved, purposeful, assured. This was no ordinary man. Isaiah stepped forward to meet him, and for a moment Marcus saw a flash of something in his father's eyes, a look of respect, of familiarity. The two men exchanged a few words, their conversation distant and muffled by the hum of the helicopter's engines. Then, as if sensing Marcus's gaze, Isaiah turned and motioned for him to come outside. Marcus hesitated for a moment before he slowly made his way to the door, stepping outside onto the porch. The moment his feet hit the ground, he was struck by the sheer power of the situation. The man who had arrived, this billionaire whose name was still unknown to him, was someone who could change everything in a single moment. But what would he do? How could a single person make a difference against the tide of everything that had happened? Isaiah turned toward Marcus, his expression serious but with a hint of pride. "Marcus, this is Mr. Grayson. He's the man I told you about." Mr. Grayson, the man who had stepped off the helicopter, turned to face Marcus. His eyes were sharp, his gaze unwavering as he extended a hand toward Marcus. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Marcus," he said, his voice calm but powerful. "Your father speaks highly of you." Marcus stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. Should he shake the man's hand? What was the right way to act in front of someone like him? But before he could make up his mind, Mr. Grayson smiled warmly and placed a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. "You've had a tough break, haven't you?" Mr. Grayson said, his voice steady. "But I don't believe for a second that this defines you. You're not the first person to face an unjust system, and you certainly won't be the last. But that doesn't mean you have to accept it. And that doesn't mean you're alone." Marcus blinked, trying to process the words. "But what can you do?" "The principal, Mr. Caldwell. He has all the power. What difference can one person make?" Mr. Grayson chuckled softly. "Let me tell you something, Marcus. Power doesn't come from position, it comes from influence. And influence? Well, it's a funny thing. It's not about how loud you are or how many people you have behind you. It's about knowing the right way to move at the right time. That's where I come in." Isaiah nodded, his expression calm. "This man doesn't give up, Marcus, and he doesn't take no for an answer." For the first time since his expulsion, Marcus felt something stir inside him, a sense of hope, fragile but real. Mr. Grayson wasn't just some distant figure. He was someone who believed in action, in making things right, not just talking about it. And that was exactly what Marcus needed. "Mr. Grayson," Marcus said, his voice quieter now, but with a newfound sense of determination. "I don't know how to thank you, but if there's a way to fix this, if there's a chance I can get back into school, I want to try." Mr. Grayson gave a small, knowing smile. "We'll make sure you get that chance, Marcus. I've already made a call. The principal won't be the problem you think he is. Not anymore." Marcus felt a rush of gratitude mixed with disbelief. He had no idea what was going to happen next, but he felt like the first step toward a new beginning had been taken. The fight wasn't over, and for the first time, he felt like he had a fighting chance. The days following Mr. Grayson's arrival felt like a blur to Marcus. Every morning he woke up to a sense of anticipation and unease. It wasn't just that he was waiting for the outcome of what had happened at school, it was the feeling that something was shifting beneath the surface of his life. The certainty he had once had, the quiet confidence that came from knowing he was doing his best, was now a distant memory. Everything had changed in an instant, and now he was living in a new reality. But there was one thing Marcus knew for sure. Mr. Grayson wasn't someone who wasted time. He had made it clear that he wasn't here for idle conversation or empty promises. When he said he would help, Marcus could see that he meant it. Every day he saw his father and Mr. Grayson huddled, together making plans, talking strategy, and setting things in motion. One afternoon, after days of preparations and meetings, Mr. Grayson called Marcus and his father into the living room. The air was thick with anticipation as the two men exchanged looks, and Marcus felt his stomach tighten. It was time. "We've got the meeting set, Mr. Grayson said, his voice steady. "Tomorrow you and I are going to have a conversation with the principal. This isn't about pleading or asking for forgiveness. This is about asserting your right to be treated with dignity and fairness." Marcus nodded, his throat dry. "But what if he refuses to listen? What if he just ignores everything we say?" Isaiah, standing beside him, placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "You're not going in there alone, Marcus. We're not asking for special treatment. We're demanding respect. You've got a right to be heard, and we'll make sure you're heard." The certainty in his father's voice gave Marcus a sense of reassurance, but the anxiety still lingered in the pit of his stomach. What if they failed? What if Mr. Caldwell was too powerful, too entrenched in the system to be moved by anything they said? The thought weighed heavily on him, but he knew one thing. He had to try. For himself, for his family, for everyone who had ever been silenced by those in power. The next morning, Marcus woke early, his mind already spinning with what was to come. He dressed quickly, his hands trembling as he buttoned his shirt. His father was already up and ready, a cup of coffee in hand as he sat at the table. But instead of his usual stoic expression, there was something different in Isaiah's eyes, a kind of quiet determination. "You ready for this?" Isaiah asked, looking up from his cup. Marcus hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "I have to be." They left the house together, walking toward the truck in silence. The drive to the school was uneventful, but the tension between father and son was palpable. Both knew what this meeting could mean, not just for Marcus, but for everything they had worked for. When they arrived at the school, the atmosphere was heavier than usual. The grounds were quiet, almost too quiet. It was as if the entire school knew something was about to happen, but no one dared to say it out loud. The walls that usually held, the sounds of laughter and conversation felt like they were closing in, as though the entire building was holding its breath. Mr. Grayson's black car was parked in front of the school's main entrance. He was already waiting for them, dressed in a sharp suit that made him seem both out of place and entirely in control. He didn't seem nervous or anxious. In fact, he almost looked like he had been through this kind of thing 100 times before. His calm demeanor reassured Marcus, but at the same time, it made him realize just how big of a deal this was. This wasn't just some small school dispute. This was about power, fairness, and justice, and they were about to take it head on. "Let's go," Mr. Grayson said, his voice low but commanding. "It's time to put an end to this." Marcus followed him and his father inside, his heart pounding with every step. As they walked down the hallway, the usual sounds of the school, the Bustling of students, the clatter of lockers seemed distant, muted. It was as if the school itself was waiting for the confrontation. When they reached the principal's office, Marcus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. Mr. Caldwell was inside, sitting behind his desk, his posture rigid and stern, as if he had been waiting for this moment too. He looked up as they entered, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Grayson," he said, his tone businesslike. "I'm assuming you're here to discuss the matter of Marcus Davis?" Mr. Grayson didn't waste time with pleasantries. "That's right. We're here to discuss why Marcus was expelled from this school and why he's being treated unfairly." Marcus watched as the two men exchanged looks, Mr. Caldwell's gaze cold and calculating, Mr. Grayson's calm and confident. It was a battle of wills, and Marcus was caught in the middle. "You must understand, Mr. Grayson," Mr. Caldwell said, leaning back in his chair. "This is a school. We have rules and we must enforce them. Marcus Davis's behavior was unacceptable. He disrupted the class, and he showed disrespect for authority." Mr. Grayson raised an eyebrow, his expression unwavering. "With all due respect, Mr. Caldwell, I think the issue here isn't about behavior. It's about prejudice, about the way you've chosen to treat Marcus because of who he is. The system here seems designed to punish those who don't fit the mold, but Marcus has every right to be here. He deserves the same opportunity as every other student in this school." Marcus held his breath as Mr. Grayson's words hung in the air. He had never heard anyone speak like this to a principal before. It was as if Mr. Grayson was daring Mr. Caldwell to defend himself. "You're accusing me of prejudice?" Mr. Caldwell's voice was tight with frustration, but he didn't raise his voice. He was trying to maintain control, but Marcus could see the cracks starting to appear. "I'm not accusing you, Mr. Caldwell," Mr. Grayson said, his tone calm but firm. "I'm stating the facts. Marcus was expelled without just cause. He was treated differently because of his background, and that's unacceptable." The room grew quiet as the words sank in. Marcus could feel the tension between the two men, but he also felt something else, something he hadn't expected. For the first time since this all began, he felt like he had a voice. He wasn't alone. He had the support of his father, of Mr. Grayson, and now he had a chance to fight back. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat, shifting in his seat. "I still stand by my decision," he said, his voice gruff. "Rules are rules." Mr. Grayson leaned forward, his eyes never leaving the principal. "Then we'll let the board decide, but I'll make sure they hear the truth. I'll make sure they know exactly what's been happening in this school." The principal's expression faltered just for a moment. It was the first sign of weakness Marcus had seen, and it gave him a surge of hope. Maybe this fight wasn't over after all. Maybe they could actually win. The meeting with Mr. Caldwell had been a turning point, but it was far from over. The principal had remained firm in his stance, his pride refusing to budge, even when confronted, with the undeniable truth that Marcus had been treated unfairly. Despite Mr. Grayson's efforts, despite Isaiah's calm and unwavering support, it was clear that Mr. Caldwell wasn't going to give up his position so easily. Marcus knew the road ahead would be hard, but for the first time in days, he wasn't completely consumed by doubt. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for something bigger. The day after the meeting, news of the confrontation spread quickly through the school. Students, teachers, and even parents had heard whispers of the Billionaire's involvement in the bold stand that Marcus's family had taken. It wasn't just about one student being expelled. It was about the system that had allowed such an injustice to happen in the first place. The next morning, Marcus arrived at school early, walking through the empty hallways with a heavy heart. He had no idea what awaited him. He knew that the students who had once quietly observed his struggles were now watching him, waiting to see how this all played out. Some were probably expecting him to back down, to retreat in shame. But Marcus wasn't sure he could back down anymore. The sting of the principal's words, the way he had been humiliated in front of his classmates, still burned deep inside. But there was something else now, something different, something stronger. As he passed by the lockers, he caught sight of a group of students huddled together in conversation. They quickly stopped talking when they saw him, and for a moment he wondered if they were talking about him. But then one of them stepped forward, Jasmine, a quiet girl from his history class. "Marcus, wait up," she called, her voice hesitant but earnest. Marcus turned around, surprised. Jasmine had never been one to speak out in the past. She was one of the quieter students, the type who blended into the background, just like he had always tried to do. "Hey, Jasmine," Marcus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "What's up?" Jasmine glanced around as if to make sure no one else was listening. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry about what happened. That wasn't right. I think you deserve to be in this school. And if you need help with anything at all, just let me know." Marcus blinked, not sure how to respond. "Thanks, Jasmine, but I don't know how much help anyone can give me right now." Jasmine shook her head, her expression serious. "You'd be surprised. You're not alone in this, Marcus. A lot of people are behind you." Marcus's heart skipped a beat as she turned to leave. He watched her walk away, feeling a strange mixture of hope and confusion. What did she mean by that? How could he not be alone? He had never considered that anyone else would want to help him. He had always kept to himself, avoided drawing attention, and now it seemed like everything was changing. As the school day progressed, Marcus began to notice something else, small but significant signs that things were shifting. Teachers who had once ignored him were now making eye contact, offering him smiles and even pausing to ask if he was okay. Students who had never given him the time of day before were nodding at him in the hallway, giving him encouragement without saying a word. It was like the whole school was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen, and Marcus felt that weight on his shoulders. But he also felt something else, a quiet, steady force building inside him. It was as if for the first time he was no longer just a student in the background. He was part of something bigger than himself. By the time the bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Marcus was overwhelmed by the shift in atmosphere. It wasn't just his classmates. Word had spread throughout the community, and soon Marcus's story was being shared on social media, in town meetings, and through local news outlets. The entire town seemed to be rallying behind him, urging the school board to take action. That afternoon, as Marcus sat at the dinner table with his father, the phone rang. Isaiah picked it up, his face unreadable as he listened to the caller on the other end. Marcus could hear the murmurs of conversation, but the words were too soft to make out. After a few moments, Isaiah set the phone down and turned to Marcus. "That was Mrs. Taylor," he said. "She's organizing a meeting with the school board tomorrow, and she wants you there." Marcus's heart leapt in his chest. Mrs. Taylor was the mother of one of his classmates, but more importantly, she was one of the town's most influential activists. She had fought tirelessly for community rights and education reform, and now she was on his side. "What's going to happen?" Marcus asked, his voice trembling slightly. Isaiah smiled, his eyes filled with pride. "We're going to make sure the school knows exactly what they're up against. This isn't just about you, Marcus. It's about what's right, and we've got the community behind us." The next day, Marcus stood outside the town hall, flanked by his father and Mr. Grayson. The streets were buzzing with energy. People had gathered to show their support, holding signs that read, "Justice for Marcus," "Equal rights for all," and "End discrimination in schools." The air was thick with anticipation, and for the first time, Marcus realized how much power there was in the people around him. Inside the meeting room, members of the school board sat behind long tables, looking uncomfortable as the crowd poured in. Mrs. Taylor was at the front of the room, her voice strong and clear as she addressed the board. "This isn't just about one student," she said, her eyes scanning the room. "This is about the future of our children. This is about ensuring that every single student has the opportunity to succeed, regardless of their background, their race, or where they come from." Her words rang through the room, and Marcus felt a sense of pride swell inside him. The community was behind him, and that made all the difference. It wasn't just his fight anymore, it was everyone's fight. One by one, people stood up to speak. Teachers, parents, and students alike, all sharing their support for Marcus and calling out the injustices that had taken place. Each word was a declaration that they would not stand by and let the system continue to oppress the ones who had no voice. Finally, it was Marcus's turn to speak. He had never been one to speak in front of crowds, but today he felt different. He stood tall and walked to the podium, his hands steady as he gripped the sides. The room fell silent as he began. I never asked for this. I never asked to be treated differently. All I ever wanted was to go to school, to learn, to have a chance like everyone else. But what happened to me wasn't just about one bad decision. It was about a system that's broken. It's about how people like me are treated differently from the start. We're told we don't belong, we don't matter, that we're not good enough. But that's not true. We are good enough. We are worthy of the same opportunities as anyone else. The room erupted in applause as Marcus finished, his heart pounding in his chest. For the first time in his life, he felt heard. He felt seen, and he knew deep in his soul that this was just the beginning. The day of the school board meeting had arrived, and Marcus couldn't remember the last time he had felt such a combination of nervousness and anticipation. It was a bright, crisp morning, and the community had gathered in full force. Everywhere he looked, there were people who had shown up to support him. His classmates, teachers, parents, and even people from surrounding towns who had heard about the injustice he had faced. The crowd outside the school board building was buzzing with energy, and the sight of it filled Marcus with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. He had never imagined that a simple incident at school could spark such a wave of support. A few days ago, he had been a quiet student just trying to get by. Now he was standing at the center of a movement for fairness and justice. Isaiah stood beside him, his hand resting reassuringly on his son's shoulder. The two men exchanged a brief but meaningful look, one that spoke volumes. Isaiah had always believed in the power of community, in the strength of people coming together to make a change. And now, Marcus was living proof of that belief. Today we show them what we're made of, Isaiah said quietly, his voice full of quiet determination. We don't back down, Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of his father's words. He had already taken the first step in this fight, standing up and speaking out. But today the stakes were higher. Today they would face the people who had the power to either make things right or allow the injustice to continue. Inside the building, the tension was palpable. The school board members sat behind their long, polished table, their faces serious, but there was an air of unease among them. It was clear they weren't accustomed to being confronted like this. There was something different in the air, something that hinted at a shift in power, and they could feel it. Mrs. Taylor, who had become a central figure in the movement for Marcus, was already at the front preparing to speak. The room was packed with supporters, their presence a testament to the growing momentum behind Marcus's cause. One by one, people took the podium, voicing their concerns about the school system, about the treatment of students who didn't fit into the established mold. Some spoke about their own experiences with prejudice. Others shared stories about their children's struggles in the classroom. The room buzzed with passion and determination, but the spotlight remained on Marcus. It was his turn to speak. He stood up from his seat and walked toward the podium, his heart racing in his chest. This wasn't a classroom anymore. This wasn't just a moment of speaking out for the sake of speaking out. This was about something bigger, something that could affect every student in the room, every teacher, every parent, and anyone who had ever felt left behind by a broken system. As Marcus approached the microphone, he felt a deep sense of connection to everyone in the room. He wasn't just standing up for himself anymore. He was standing up for all of them, the ones who had been ignored, dismissed, or pushed aside. He knew the weight of what he was about to do, but he also knew that he couldn't back down now. The room fell silent as Marcus took a deep breath and began to speak. I never asked for any of this. All I ever wanted was to go to school, to learn and to have the same opportunities as everyone else. But instead I've been treated as if I don't belong here. I've been treated like I'm less than everyone else just because of who I am. I was expelled for something that wasn't my fault, and now I stand here facing a system that doesn't seem to care. His voice trembled slightly, but he didn't stop. He had come this far and he wasn't going to back down now. This isn't just about me, he continued, his gaze sweeping across the room. This is about all the students who have been told they don't belong. This is about the students who have been silenced because they didn't fit the image of what a good student is supposed to be. I'm here today to tell you that we deserve better. We deserve respect. We deserve to be treated like we matter. The room erupted in applause. Marcus's words hung in the air, stirring something in everyone who heard them. For the first time, the community saw him not just as a student, but as a leader, a symbol of everything they had been fighting for. His courage sparked something in the crowd, and the energy in the room shifted, growing stronger, more unified. But the applause was short-lived. The school board members exchanged uneasy glances, but it was Mr. Caldwell, the principal, who stood up next, his face a mask of frustration and defiance. "Mr. Davis," he said, his voice tight, "you're making a lot of accusations, but you have to understand I didn't expel you because of who you are. I expelled you because of your behavior. The rules are the rules, and they must be enforced." Marcus could see the cracks in Mr. Caldwell's facade. He wasn't as certain as he had been earlier. The tension in the room was palpable, and even the school board members seemed to be uncomfortable with what was unfolding. Mr. Grayson, who had been standing quietly at the back of the room, stepped forward. His presence was commanding, and his voice rang out clearly as he addressed the board. "With all due respect, Mr. Caldwell, you're mistaken. This isn't about behavior. This is about a systematic problem. This is about how the rules are applied to certain students differently than to others. This is about bias and about a system that doesn't work for everyone. You have the power to change that today." There was a moment of silence as Mr. Caldwell clenched his fists, trying to maintain control. But the pressure was mounting, and the truth was undeniable. For the first time, Marcus saw a glimmer of doubt in the principal's eyes. This wasn't just about a student's behavior anymore. This was about a system that had failed to protect those who needed it most. "We've already spoken to the school board," Mr. Grayson continued, "and they will be reviewing your decision. But let's be clear, this situation will not be swept under the rug. If you do not take responsibility for what has happened, you will face the consequences." Marcus watched as Mr. Caldwell's face turned pale. It was the first time he had seen the principal genuinely shaken. The room was electric with the weight of what had just been said. The community had come together, and they were demanding change. They were no longer willing to sit in the background and accept things as they were. The school board members shifted uneasily in their seats. One by one, they stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. It was clear that Marcus had made an impact on them. His words, his courage, his fight for justice had reached them in a way nothing else had. The meeting stretched on for hours, but the decision was clear. The school board voted overwhelmingly to reinstate Marcus, acknowledging the unfair treatment he had received and vowing to address the systemic issues that had allowed it to happen. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had done it. He had stood up, spoken out, and changed the course of his future. And the best part? He wasn't alone. The entire community had stood behind him, and together, they had made sure that justice had been served. The days following the school board meeting were a whirlwind. Marcus had barely had time to process everything that had happened. He'd gone from being expelled and feeling like an outsider to standing up in front of a room full of people demanding justice and winning. But it wasn't over. The school board's decision to reinstate him was just the beginning. The battle for fairness, for equality, wasn't something that could be won with one victory. But Marcus had learned something profound in those weeks of turmoil. The real change starts from within. The first day back at school felt surreal. As Marcus walked through the familiar halls, it was as though everything had shifted. It wasn't just that he was back in class, it was the way the atmosphere had changed around him. There was a new respect in the air, a recognition that he wasn't just another student. He was someone who had stood up for what was right, someone who had changed the narrative not only for himself but for others as well. Students greeted him with nods of approval, and teachers who had once ignored him now made an effort to engage with him, to make him feel included. There was a warmth in the air, a sense that things were different, and Marcus couldn't help but smile at the subtle shift. But even more than that, he felt something inside himself that had been missing for a long time. Pride. It was a strange feeling at first. Marcus wasn't used to being the center of attention, but now, for the first time, he wasn't shrinking away from it. He wasn't hiding in the background trying to go unnoticed. He had stepped forward, and people were noticing, not because of his mistakes or his failures, but because of his courage. The courage to stand up when everyone else was silent. The courage to demand what was rightfully his. And that, more than anything, was what changed the game for Marcus. The week after his return to school, a celebration was held in his honor. The school, once so cold and indifferent to him, now embraced him as a symbol of resilience. Teachers and students alike gathered in the cafeteria to share in the victory, not just of Marcus's reinstatement, but of the victory of truth over silence, of justice over oppression. As Marcus sat at the front of the room, surrounded by his friends, his classmates, and his teachers, he realized something important. This moment wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. It was about the silent voices, the ones who had suffered in silence for far too long. Marcus was no longer just a student. He was a representative of something much bigger than himself, a movement for fairness and equality. His father, Isaiah, stood by his side, his presence as strong as ever. Isaiah's eyes shone with pride, not just for his son's success, but for the journey they had both taken together. It had been a long, hard road, but they had made it through. And now Isaiah was looking at his son with a new kind of respect. Marcus had always been his pride and joy, but now he had become a symbol of strength and courage. A reminder that no matter how hard life gets, you can always find a way forward. Marcus, Mrs. Taylor, the activist who had been such a strong supporter, said as she stood at the podium, "Your bravery has inspired so many of us. You've shown us what it means to stand up for what's right even when it's hard. You've made a difference, and you've made this school a better place for all of us." The applause that followed was deafening. Marcus felt a rush of emotions, but mostly he felt gratitude. Gratitude for his father's unwavering support, for the community that had rallied behind him, and for the chance to change not just his own future, but the futures of others who had been silenced before him. As the applause died down, Marcus stood up to speak. His hands shook slightly, but his voice was steady as he addressed the crowd. "I never thought I'd be standing here today, in front of all of you," he began, his voice stronger than it had ever been before. "But here we are, and I want to say thank you to everyone who believed in me, who stood by me, who helped me when I needed it the most. You all showed me that I'm not alone in this fight, that no matter how hard things get, there's always hope. There's always a way forward." The crowd erupted into applause again, but this time Marcus felt something different. He wasn't just speaking to the people in the room. He was speaking to everyone who had ever been told they couldn't make it, everyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough. This was for them, for the people who had been told to keep quiet, to stay out of the way, to accept their fate. Marcus had found his voice, and he knew that his voice wasn't just his own. It was the voice of everyone who had been silenced. As the celebration ended, Marcus walked home with his father. The weight of the past few weeks hung heavy on him, but he didn't feel burdened anymore. He felt free. He had fought for something that mattered, and he had won. But more than that, he had become someone he could be proud of. "Your mother would be proud of you," Isaiah said quietly, as they walked down the road, their footsteps echoing in the quiet evening. "She always believed in you, Marcus. She would have been right here with us today, cheering you on." Marcus nodded, a lump forming in his throat. He missed his mother every day, but he knew she was still with him, in his strength, in his courage, in the way he had risen to meet the challenges that had been thrown his way. He could feel her presence in the moments of triumph, in the moments of struggle, and in the moments of quiet reflection. When they reached the house, Marcus stopped for a moment to look at the stars. They were bright in the night sky, shining down like 1,000 tiny beacons of hope. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," he said, his voice full of determination. "I know the road won't always be easy, but I won't back down. I won't let anyone tell me I don't belong." Isaiah placed a hand on his shoulder, looking up at the stars with him. "That's the spirit, son. That's how we keep moving forward."